This case made headline news when a woman was found dead at a university in central London. Her name, Elizabeth Stacey. She was 24 years of age and worked as a lab technician inside the psychology department at the university. Elizabeth was described as a warm, compassionate person who would do anything to help her colleagues and really enjoyed her job. She was brilliant with computers, managing different servers and educating staff on how to navigate problems with them. That Friday, the 5th of November in the year 2000, Elizabeth travelled to work as usual and arrived through the front doors of the university at the normal time. But that night, her parents realised she was missing. She had also not turned up to meet a friend that she'd arranged to meet. It was very unlike Elizabeth. She was always in contact with her parents, and they knew something was terribly wrong. Her family spoke with the university, and they also noted that Elizabeth was missing. The following day, the police spoke to the last people Elizabeth had associated with. But who had she spoken to? And what had she said? Had she arranged to meet anyone? And how was her demeanour? They soon determined that the last person to speak to Elizabeth was a man named Stephen Reed. But then, her body was discovered in a little used university research facility room by a member of staff. Police were called and they cordoned off the area. They wanted to know who had access to the room prior to the events. Elizabeth Stacey had been battered around the head with a blunt force object. She lay on the floor of the room dead in a pool of her own blood, and it was evident to the pathologist that Elizabeth had suffered extensive skull fractures, and her body was taken for a full forensic examination. Her clothes had not been removed, and police did not believe that she'd been sex assaulted, but they were waiting for forensic tests to be completed. But it would appear that Elizabeth had sustained all these wounds during a violent struggle. It was discovered that the object used to commit these blows to her skull was probably a rolling pin. She had received in total 7 full blows to the face and skull, leaving her with numerous skull fractures and extensive facial fractures. Elizabeth had died from choking on her own blood and the severe head trauma. But who would do this to a young lady in her own place of work, where she should have felt safe? When the police worked out that Stephen Reed was the last person to be with Elizabeth, they wanted to know more about him. Who was he, and where was he from? What they could determine was that he was a bit of a loner. He looked depressed and kept himself to himself. He was a graduate student at the university. Apparently he loved to take long walks on Hampstead Heath. No one seemed to know very much about him, but he was firmly placed in the department and the last person to be seen with Elizabeth that day. Police and forensic worked hard to find the clues as to who was responsible for this horrific murder of a beautiful, kind young woman who had everything to live for. They gathered pathology, fingerprints, and photographed the scene. Detectives looked into who this Stephen was and where he lived. This information was readily available due to the fact that Stephen worked at the university, and it was documented as him living at Gloucester Terrace in London. Detectives quickly homed in on their chief suspect in this case, at least to try and eliminate him from their inquiries. Police travelled to Stephen's home as he did not turn up for work at the university the following day. They hoped to find him at the address and spoke to relatives, friends and neighbours to see where he frequented when he was not at home. Police went to Stephen Reed's mother's house. She was shocked to see police on her doorstep. She told them she'd not seen her son. Friends said that he was fond of the West Country and Cornwall in particular. By now, Stephen knew police were on his trail. So on the run, he attempted to end his own life in a bid to join Elizabeth. But I'm pretty sure she would not have wanted him to join her, but I digress. His attempt failed, so he attempted again for a second time to end his life. But when a second attempt failed, he went on the run. It also stood out to police that Reed had suddenly disappeared from the university around the same time that Elizabeth was killed. Police now believe that Stephen was the main suspect in this crime. Behind the scenes, Stephen was now on the run. He watched the news as the crime hit the headlines, with detectives calling out his name as the chief suspect on their news channels. Stephen started to feel like he had little time left before he got caught, and again packed up and continued to move on. Police were now concerned that he could be anywhere in the country, keeping low profile, possibly changing his name. Where would they ever find him? So when police decided to reconstruct the crime for the influential programme Crime Watch on the BBC, they hoped new leads would come in as to where he was. And after BBC's Crime Watch publicised the hunt for him, a lady called in to say that she had seen him. She had seen him on Western Road in Brighton selling the Big Issue magazine. They arrived on scene and arrested him as he stood selling the magazine. He gave them a false name, but they knew they had their man. It was a very extensive inquiry, and to know they now had their main suspect in custody, it was not only a relief for the family, but also for the public and the detectives who worked so hard to find him. It was said that that day, one of her colleagues, Stephen Reed, had lured her into the research room.
Hello, how are you?
Not bad. Quite tired, I guess.
You worry too much. Don't let it get on top of you. Hi, Jane. Can I have a word?
Actually, I've been working on this new web mod.
How are you getting on?
Well, not too bad.
This new software is causing all sorts of problems. Try clicking on this icon. Yeah, and into this file here. This is a favourite shortcut of mine. Stephen, hi.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Fine. Liz, I'm sorry to bother you, but I can't seem to open Windows on the computer in the postgrad lab.
Well, we've just finished up, haven't we, Gary?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, a couple of minutes. Right now?
Yeah, just that I can't really do anything unless
Okay, let's go and have a look, shall we? See you later.
I can't do a thing with it.
Alright, let's have a look. Mind you, this can try. Let's see what we've got in here.
As he'd asked her to help him sort out a computer problem that he was having. But he did not have a computer problem. He had looked and watched Elizabeth from afar. Once in the room alone with her, she sat down at the computer to try and help him, but he stood behind her pretending to be watching. He then started to attack her, leaving her for dead. The man apparently battered Elizabeth around the head with a rolling pin that he had brought in especially for the purpose. 7 blows later, Elizabeth, a brilliant laboratory technician who had everything to live for, lay dying with numerous skull fractures and extensive facial injuries. She was left moaning in pain as the man who she had trusted turned out the light, locked the door, and left her to drown in her own blood. He had carefully chosen her for the killing. He was born in Edinburgh and was now living on Gloucester Terrace in London. He had quickly been identified as the main suspect and arrested 12 days later. He was initially arrested for murder, but was then acquitted of murder and convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Passing sentence in court, Judge Evans said to the emotionless killer, "This was a deliberate and planned killing. The tragic circumstances of this case have left the whole academic community perplexed. The ferocity of your actions provided a massive and unexpected shock to your colleagues and those who knew Elizabeth. It is clear that you have a grave personality disorder, a danger to the public." As Miss Stacey's family watched from the public gallery, the judge added, "Some doctors are of the view there is a risk you could kill again. Others are not sure whether it could be ruled out." He said Mr. Reed's untreatable personality disorder combined with a state of depression led him to kill. Should that depression reoccur, it could detonate further unexpected and violent behaviour, and that is what represents a grave danger to the public. This means that you will go to prison and that you will remain there for the rest of your natural life or until a panel decides it is safe for you to be released. Even they will not be able to recommend your release until at least 7 years have passed. The lecturer said he lived in an aimless existence and thought his chance of companionship would come by killing Miss Stacy and then taking his own life and having a friend in the afterlife. Although he did not deny the killing, he pleaded not guilty to murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. During the case, the jury heard that Stephen Reed, originally from Edinburgh, had never had a girlfriend and suffered depression. Giving evidence, he said the idea of killing his female colleague came to him some days before her death. He intended to knock her unconscious and then suffocate her by taping her mouth. But when she failed to lose consciousness with the first blow, he ended up striking her at least 7 times before leaving her alone in the darkness to drown in her own blood. It was over a day before her body was found in the locked room. When Miss Stacy began working as a psychology department researcher, Stephen was feeling extremely depressed. Her arrival had apparently made him happier, he said. She was a very warm and compassionate person. She was very caring and made special effort to talk to me when I was doing things. A pathology lecturer, Stephen Reed, had been sentenced to life in prison for battering a colleague to death, and the reason, so he could have a friend in the afterlife.